Welcome to episode 16, guys, of the Ancient Intelligent Files. What we're going to go through today spans way back in history into the Sumerian times of the first written text up to what the title of the video is talking about now, because what they're doing is replacing a system of ancient technology that was built back in the time of the Sumerians and the Egyptians and was fallen angel technology. And what we're seeing is the rebuilding of that same tech right now. They're using crystals, they're creating super high power, and if they're not somehow stopped as they were in the flood, then it will destroy the planet. But if you remember, and I've talked about the Sumerian texts going back into the Anunnaki and the tribes of Anu and Adad, Enlil, and Enki and that group many times. And that one of the things that was key to their technology and their power were the crystals. And if you remember, Enlil and Enki had come to, or their group had come to a peace agreement. And so they didn't really get ran out or overtaken inside the pyramid where the crystals were stored, from where the war had been going on and where the crystals had been used as energy and weapons, just like the lasers. And shields, by the way. Anyway, those crystals were, some were destroyed, some were taken, but what happened was during the peace treaty, Enlil's group eased in there and did the destruction, but they saved some of the chips, the crystals, which today we would call chips, and a lot of them have silicon quartz-based technology, same thing. But the ancient crystals, they say that the memory would last at least 10 million years because they can etch it now at the University of Chicago into crystals with a digital code of 0 and plus ones, digital coding. And if the crystal has some width to it, they can do it in 3 different areas. And then when you energize that information to be retrieved, guys, just like on a CD or DVD player, then you're going to get a 3D image like you see going back to the Star Wars movie where there's a little video that pops up, but it's in 3D with some information on it. Remember that? And so 10 million years, that's a long time. And to be in 3D is pretty cool. Anyway, that technology is ancient. That's where we get the name of the series. And we know about that. We know, again, that kind of ended the pyramid wars, but they had been devastating. There were a lot of damage done on both sides up to that point, but Enki's group had held off pretty good. But during that peace treaty, then they snuck in and did the damage. But again, Enlil saved some of the crystals, and the red crystals were the most powerful. They were used for guidance and weaponry. He didn't destroy some of them. Remember, he removed them. And I think, guys, if you look at it, and just hang in there with me, we're going to get to kind of the middle of the story in just a moment. But in that story, and they talk about as the great floods came in, the birds lifted off, or the craft, the ships of the Anunnaki knew the flood was coming, more than likely had something to do with it. Remember, Enlil wanted to flood the people off the planet, and Enki wanted to save a certain group. It's the Noah situation. Anyway, the birds lifted off as the flood waters came in, and they watched it. Remember in the reports, they saw the waters rise, just like if you were perched, I guess, on the Noah's Ark, but they were at higher elevation. Now, that technology was not destroyed. It was more than likely, but remember, the red crystals were used for navigation and weaponry. And one of them they called, we'll look at the name in just a moment, but they used it in the spaceports, or what we would call airports, but their craft were different. But for guidance, it would put out a homing beacon, like a GPS signal. And it could use for many things because it seemed to be pretty large via the descriptions. And just to tell you how much data in different types of data that could be stored in them and be used. And in the Anunnaki stories of their approach to Earth, they were using crystals, inserting them into their guidance and navigation systems. Anyway, let's move forward in time just a moment. Again, move forward to the days of the Ark. And a lot of people think of the breastplates on the priest. Remember, they had 12 different colored stones or crystals on that breastplate. It wasn't decoration as what, the thing that we're being told. Each of those 12 stones, it was sardis, topaz, carbuncle, emerald, sapphire, diamond, ligure, agate, amethyst, beryl, onyx, and jasper. Each has a different crystalline structure and a resonant frequency. Think about what I'm telling you. Now, what were they dealing with when they handled the Ark? Guys, it was an extreme weapon that would kill you if you touched it improperly. Remember when they slipped and the fella grabbed it and it killed him? And you just could only handle the insulation of the wooden handles. Remember that? Well, and the breastplate covers your vagus nerve system that controls your heart. Think about that. And anyway, according to the information, when these priests with this breastplate, with the different crystals on it, when they came in contact with the Ark, probably just them, not people around, but then when contact was made, their response was given to them by certain crystals lighting and vibrating. And that was the messaging system between them and the Ark, the power inside of it, the power where ancient intelligence was, is, and will be forever, because it was sent by our Father. It is a storage vault, as a crystal of the entire history of everything, because it will be needed in times like this, or the world will destroy itself. And God, the first stone was a red stone. It was sardis or odem. This mirrors the red Nibiru crystal found in the king's chamber. It provided the grounding and power frequency for the entire array of the other 11 crystals. And how many times have we talked about induction coupling in this series, from CERN up into the new technology that we're seeing in the data centers, right? And possibly going to a cryogenic cooler induction coupling through quantum entanglement. But when the high priest approached the Ark, the energy emitting from the Ark of the Covenant, which technically was a capacitor, would induce a charge in the stones of the breastplate. Think about that. Think about it was made of wood, chittim wood, I think, and then covered in gold, which is one of the best conductors made. Not the absolute best, but at that time it was pretty good. Still used everywhere, right? And so you couldn't, if you touched it, you were going to get that zap that the guy got when he died, when the Ark was slipping and he was trying to save it from falling and hitting the ground or the water. Anyway, that is a capacitor. Now think about this. Not only was the Ark covered in the gold, but so were the two cherubims with the wings that almost touched each other. They didn't touch, they covered almost everything but the very center of the Ark. And there would be quite an arc between those two, if you understand what I'm saying, with the power inside of them. Anyway, there was some type of weapon, possibly stored information, possibly a crystal. We don't know. But it would, again, induce a charge in the stones of the breastplate. And guys, there behind that breastplate was a little pocket, and there contained Urim and Thummim, and it was described as lights and perfections. Think about that. The stones would light up in a specific sequence, essentially streaming data from the Creator's realm to the priest. Think about that. And it was very strong, it was very powerful, and they were protecting it. And you realize that you've seen movies, books, documentaries, ad nauseum on people searching for the lost Ark of the Covenant? You know, when Revelation clearly tells you it's in heaven with our Father. But they're looking for a piece of energy, just as the people were robbing the graves and the treasures of the pyramids, as the Nazis moved through looking for what they were looking, the same thing. They were looking for technological weapons that were advanced and ancient information. And it was ancient intelligence that they were all looking for. Was there a code in the pyramids? Was there a code in the Rosetta Stone? Was there a code in the Dead Sea Scrolls that would give us power over our enemies, or the blueprint of the technology over our enemies? Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, that's what the breastplate was about. Crystals have always been a very important thing in the history of mankind, because the earth is made of crystals and they resonate at the alpha wave frequency. But these machines that they're building, they're going to do everything they can, as they're doing other things, to block every piece of the calming sections of the Schumann frequencies. And the humans will be driven mad almost, because imagine living somewhere like Phoenix, and now you've got very close to DC, up in the Virginia area, it's one of the largest areas of data centers that I know of. It may contain, if I'm not mistaken, guys, it's not far from DC, and they would be affected by that magnetism beaming out, not the heat, but they're affecting the electromagnetic fields, because it's not just heat. Remember, it's a frequency. And that is what really keeps the atmosphere agitated for 6 miles. It's not, I don't think, the radiated heat. That just usually does not happen. Anyway, now we're talking about a new grid system being activated now as we speak by Intelligenc, ancient AI, and the new agentic AI. Basically, man has built the entrance, the Silicon Highway. But for a moment, I want to focus on the old communication system that was built by the fallen in many cases, but maybe not all, because remember, there were good and bad. Ezekiel, he knew a group that had craft, had technology, that were very benevolent, that were sent by our Father. And of course, the fallen had the same technology. Both were of the same group at one time, remember, before the war in heaven. Anyway, what we're looking at now is the fact that the old system was destroyed, not only in that war of the pyramids, guys, but that world, that flood, and the end of the Younger Dryas had a lot to do with not only just destroying a lot of the machinery, but they covered a lot in the floods. Some of that may be SOSing out now. Save our ship beacons, things like that. We'll talk about that in the next video. Anyway, what we're dealing with, and we'll look at some of the evidence. A lot of people, scientists have said, and you know how far that goes, because they are indoctrinated to follow mainstream narrative as far as reporting what they find. They got to stay in the bounds regardless of what they know. And they say that the markings around the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, where you see most of the limestone or the white stone granite is gone from about from the ground to about 2/3 of the way up, right? And then you have the white stone. But what's missing is the bottom, and they all had a gold-plated tip at the very top. Gold's a very good transmitter, by the way. Anyway, the narrative was the washing and the erosion around the Sphinx was all the rain and everything. But guys, during that period, Egypt had been in a hyper-arid zone for 5,000 years. And again, they're suggesting the damage around it, the pyramid and the erosion around the Sphinx. You've seen the walls occurred when the region was much wetter, potentially at the end of the Ice Age, the Younger Dryas. Now, some people are saying that the casing stones to the Khafre Pyramid, that's the big one, claiming they show karst undercutting and wave patterns consistent with being partially submerged in salt water. That's what I'm saying, that our Father during the flood, remember what it was for? To take out the giants, take out the fallen, and the fallen tech, remember? The world was in a perilous situation. And so when they say that the stones that are missing from the pyramid, guys, and were taken down by man to rebuild other buildings, that's just a cover-up. I'm not saying they didn't use the stones to rebuild buildings, but the stones were loosened during that flood. Why do you think you see the salt water markings in the karst undercutting? He moved and he shut it down. Now, after all these years, it's being rebuilt, and we're at that point. And guys, think about the book of Enoch. It was full of fallen angels and fallen angel tech, and good angel tech, if that's how you want to classify it, messengers. But what was one thing about it is the mainstream media still to this day follows that pattern. They removed the book of Enoch and others, but it was a mainstay until the narrative changed, and the religious doctrines needed it changed. And just like they ignore the physical evidence, like the Giza waterline or the piezoelectric properties of granite, to protect a specific historical timeline. Now, what they're talking about, the piezoelectric properties of granite. Piezoelectricity, guys, occurs when two crystals are rubbed together. It creates a spark, it creates electricity. There's been many small devices, larger devices that have been built using that. If someone steps on something or drives over it or something like that, it creates enough electricity to do something, light a light or whatever it is. And many other, that's kind of the basic technology of it. It's a form of crystal technology. But the pyramids were built out of granite, which is full of crystals. Think about this. Now, as you press on granite, it releases electricity. Do you know how much that pyramid weighed? So it was under constant pressure, constantly emitting electricity with a gold tip at the top. One of the best conductors, one of them ever made. These were energy centers. Inky's group used it as a war base. The war would have went on forever. They almost starved to death inside. Is probably why they agreed to the peace treaty. But it was, again, it was like a fort they held up in, fighting Inky's forces. So that grid was using the energy, the piezoelectric energy of the pressure of the granite to power up the crystals. That's why they had to be removed. They were taking the weapons away from the enemy. Now, again, we're using crystal technology now, from CERN to the data centers to the banks to everything to Starlink. But anyway, there were 54 different crystals, 27 pairs, in that Sumerian work. Ninurta, remember, was the one that entered the evacuated pyramid. And I guess evacuation is a correct word, but they had left to go to the peace treaty meeting. But they were allegedly part of an energy spiraling system used for interplanetary communication. They were positioned along the ramps of what we still call the Grand Gallery in that pyramid. One was called the Gug Stone. And Ninurta reportedly removed the Gug Stone, which they called the Direction Determining Stone, GPS. It came in their ships. I'm not saying they created it. I don't think they did. They were using the ancient information stored by the Creator and into these because he knew man would need them one day. Anyway, and this information is starting to be pulled out. Anyway, the Gug Stone, the direction determining stone from the pyramid's apex, and smashed it to ensure the structure could never be used as a technological weapon again. By removing the crystals and the technical equipment, the victors turned the pyramid into a dead mountain, leaving it an empty shell for later Egyptians to discover and repurpose. Remember, as the flood came in, they lifted off. How many of the crystals were aboard those ships? Everything they had were, because they used them aboard there, plus they were saving them. They knew they would need it. They could always draw on those crystals, powered up, and draw any information they needed. Are you following me? Because the information in those crystals was ancient intelligence stored. Everything was put in there. It's a message from our Father. He said, I will send messengers. I will have a way for you to know. And some of that technology was discovered. Remember, we talked about them searching, the Nazis, everybody else, way past that, for hidden secrets and treasures of information and knowledge. But modern science uses quartz crystals for frequency control and energy, the same material found in the granite of the king's chamber. Some people argue that the current tech is simply a low-level version of the crystal technology that the Anunnaki utilized. I agree, because the reason they're powering up all these data centers, guys, is because they're trying to connect into it with as much power as they can to draw as much information out as they can. Some theories suggest that our current leap into artificial intelligence and genetic engineering is actually the consciousness returning to Earth, allowing us to unlock the secrets that were previously vandalized or hidden by Enlil's faction. Again, Enlil did not like the humans. He wanted them flooded out. Enki provided a path, his brother. And so it's always been that battle since the days of Cain and Abel. And you know who started that, both sides of it. Now, you can look up articles about this, but there's tablets that they're calling, it's spelled like me, but it's pronounced May, M-E-H. But the May tablets in Sumerian myth, they're called tablets of destiny, or May, were divine blueprints for civilization, technology, law, and art. When those were stolen or hidden, humanity lost its source code. It was all in the crystals. That's what they're trying to find. That's what they're trying to utilize to this day. Now, if you think about it, one of the reasons, and again, you guys should look up just for DC, the Virginia area, look up the number of data centers. It's amazing. And the big ones are all in a dome, basically, that covers everything from Langley to the Pentagon to the White House to all the buildings. Look up data centers near Washington, D.C., and look at northern Virginia. You'll be amazed at how much is there. I think one of the largest concentration areas on the planet. But again, the reemergence today is seen by some as the retrieval of these digital energetic blueprints. That's been the basic message of this entire series, because I agree 100%, because the message is too clear. And the reason it's too clear to me and you is because, like I've said every time, we've been watching for a reason. And, you know, guys, if you look at, when I say modern, this century, you know, maybe last 50 years, books, and then maybe 40 years into movies or so, remember the one, it was Close Encounters, the first one. So you had the group of scientists with a bunch of different colored lights and speakers and sounds. Different colors, just like the breastplates of the priests. But that was an inductance. That breastplate was an inductance loop between the power inside that ark and the breastplate of the priest. Anyway, that coloration that the scientists were sending to the craft that was landed there, what happened? The craft responded in the same patterns of different colored lights and sounds. Where do you think they get that information? It's from the old data and looking deep into the Hebrew and things like that, and looking into the old text. And maybe they have had a taste of the ancient intelligence, like Einstein or Oppenheimer and some of the other ones. God uses who he wants. We don't. He chooses that. Guys, and you know, they call that red crystal the stone of destiny. We've heard that before. We've heard it in religious doctrine. We've heard it in movies. The stone of destiny. And the reason they say it is because it contained the programs for civilization. And that's what we now have called LLMs, or large language models. They're trying to get as much as they can, decipher it, and use it again as a fallen angel tech. But they hate humans. Satan does not like anything God has created. And one way of blocking the communication is to fill the air between all of these data centers, just like the pyramids and the monoliths did. Before that era was wiped out by the flood. You see the results in the pyramids. And what did you get? About 12 of those obelisks moved from Egypt into Rome. We got one in D.C. or New York in the Park, I think. You got the largest monolith of all, which was the Washington Monument. Anyway, at all the important centers, we have the newer ones. And again, they were moved around the Vatican, and I think 12, maybe you guys look it up. But they're everywhere. Different nations, France, I think there's one in Paris. Just look up where the monoliths, not the monoliths, the obelisk, which are kind of like a monolith. Anyway, look up the obelisk, like the Washington Monument. Look up, again, in the nations, you'll see. And it was after, that was really not long ago when all of that happened, if you think about it in time. And so why were they wanting all of those towers or antennas in that area and in other areas? They say the one in Washington was built in honor of George Washington. But that thing is so big that the sub-basement is grounded into the water basin. And it's got not a gold roof, but a better conductor than that at a different frequency, and it's aluminum. Gold is a great conductor, but it doesn't hold up to the weather like aluminum does. And what happens, guys, is if either one is hit with, say, electrical bolt or anything like that, the aluminum vibrates at a different frequency than gold does, a specific different frequency. Again, it all grounded into the groundwater, and the whole total thing is 666 feet. I've been there twice. Now, these tall buildings like this, a lot of times you'll see some type of metal on there. It has to do with the lightning rods. And in the Washington Monument, the elevator shafts, guys, have 4 massive beams that are made of wrought iron. Anyway, they are also used as grounding conductors going deep into the basement. But also think about this. It's made of granite just like the pyramids are. And it produces energy just like the pyramids do. And so it has to be grounded because of that piezo effect. And so will that be part of the new network? Is that why some of the ones were moved out of Egypt after the floods knocked a lot of them down, things like that? And really Egypt was conquered, and then it probably didn't have a hell of a lot to say about it. But just like people were searching for the ark, and the armies were searching for hidden tech, there was a rush to get this, and it took great effort to move some of these big obelisks. So you had an electrical grid created around the world between the pyramids, the obelisks, the pyramids in Mexico, Peru, all around the planet. The fallen tech had built a grid of communication, power, and frequency. And it was to wear down mankind in a lot of ways. just because you couldn't go into the natural frequency that our Father designed this entire universe under, including your Vega system, you. Now guys, if we tie in the data centers, we cannot forget the largest of all, the ground of the entire system. It's called CERN. Now again, we looked at the largest data center in the Phoenix area on the video the other day, the one up in Mesa. But CERN is the main ground of the entire conductor of the planet as far as the fallen tech machines go. So you got CERN, Starlink, AI data centers. They're representing the literal activation of the global grid that was dismantled during the ancient conflicts. The pyramids were the physical hardware of their internet even. Our modern infrastructure is the digital successor, using the same quartz-based resonance to bridge the gap between the dimensions. And that is how our Father is going to send his message to us, is via the messages he stored in the very beginning in the crystals he made. It was a digital hard drive for mankind. Guys, we're watching it, you watch it, I'm not going to keep it much longer, but what we're again talking about is the fact that that system was destroyed. It's been rebuilt. And it's being rebuilt because of the discoveries that I was talking about over the centuries of this ancient tech, and while certain books were taken out so it wouldn't expose that tech when it reemerged. But here we are, CERN is about to run at full power until June 29th, shuts down for 4 years. Full power to try to reach peak power. That's not very long from now, is it? This is May. We've got the solar activity kicking up. Again, the second peak of the solar cycle. You know, we see that the southern hemisphere of the sun is heating up. So the energy's in place. And if they get that network going, which I don't doubt that it will be powered up much stronger than it is now in the 5G global net that we deal with. And it's going to be so powerful, just like in Phoenix, where we're talking about you didn't get the night cooling and your body couldn't recoup. We're going to start seeing those effects. And will that be part of the 5 months of agony before that machine is shut down? By this time, possibly a digital flood, a tidal wave of digital code shutting it all down. You think about what I'm talking about, it goes much deeper than this. And people are thinking now that, you know, CERN says it's smashing atoms, but actually the Gugstone that Nerda destroyed was a communication link. And that CERN is trying to pierce that veil and reopen that communication channel that was closed when the Gugstone was destroyed. Now, interestingly, CERN technology is now being used to enable AI interference at the edge on satellites, creating a direct link between subatomic research and orbital intelligence. Listen. These are viewed as the new temples, just as the pyramids required massive energy and quartz-rich granite. Again, when I'm talking about the weight of the pyramids are creating so much energy, guys, that's, again, they were communication centers that required this energy to activate those crystals. That weight, just as the pyramids required massive energy and quartz-rich granite, AI data centers are consuming unprecedented amounts of electricity, transforming the global power grid and even moving into space to harness free solar energy. They've been in space for a long time since AI came around. But this is what I'm talking about. This is what the video is about right here. Summed up is that this is the new system. And the whole thing is, again, because people are lazy to do the banking and all of the data and all of that, right? But the main back cause, kind of the hidden cause, is this right here. They want to reopen that, tie into the data of the ancient knowledge, and what's going to happen to them. As our Father smiles because nothing formed against us will prosper, remember, is that when they open that gate, our Father's going to step through it, His power, His angels, His knowledge, His frequencies, and it's going to be a reverse setup. In other words, they're walking into a trap, just like the flood trapped them. And what else can you say about it? Again, they are, as they produce the energy, to obtain this opening and this connection and to tap back in, they're destroying the planet. Don't you think that's why our Father stepped in and took them down the first time? So think about it. Keep Him in mind. Tell Him, don't wait too long. That 5 months is going to draw out pretty quick. Pretty hard on us, And again, it's going to come down to this. You don't want to stand in line under someone's command waiting for a crumb of bread, do you? You got to prepare. Time's getting short, guys. Thank you for coming. This series is very interesting to me, and I had to take the time to put it into some type of format that we can all share, but that's kind of a burden of love in a way, but it's a message that I think we need to understand, because we're just now, because of what we're seeing and looking back at the ancient technology, even realizing how powerful that ancient technology was, and the fact that it was crystal-based ancient information, ancient intelligence. And now that is coming back to this planet, again, as almost a rescue mission. We're watching it, guys. You watch it. God bless every one of you. It's a heads up. Be safe.